Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to what is going on internationally, particularly, of course, the conflict and now genocide that it has existed since October 7th, and many argue from decades before as to what is going on in the Gaza Strip against Palestinians, something that has got the international community's attention, with people saying that finally this is something that perhaps is echoing in the voices around the world with regards to calls for ceasefire and the end towards genocide. We haven't, of course, seen that happening yet, and we have seen more than 11,000 lives being lost since October 7th, and this is something that includes largely women and children. And it is, of course, unfortunate that this turn of events is happening while at the same time we see leaders from strong political fronts and states, including the US and the UK, still not backing calls for ceasefire. So this is, of course, something that we're going to be exploring further in terms of what has happened so far since October 7th, where the conflict is since its beginning, and how exactly is there going to be any move towards de-escalation when we don't really see world leaders moving towards that stance. There have been, of course, many political stances taken calling for the leadership to go ahead and call for ceasefire, but perhaps the kind of front that we had expected to see, or the world is now demanding to see, is something that still remains to be seen. So we're going to try and explore what really is going on at the moment and what is the future course of action with regards to the evolution of this conflict, and what really is it that is needed for the end of this genocide that is currently happening. That's going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a little look at the situation at home, with the way that political dynamics seem to be changing, particularly in the form of new alliances that are being formed in light of the PMLN's leadership, including Mr. Nawaz Sharif, that have been meeting different party leaders and moving ahead with the seat adjustments and bringing in more electables within their portfolio to go ahead to contest the elections on February 8th. This is, of course, something that has been spoken about previously as well, especially prior to the return of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, and the impact that that will have. And since then, there is a large underlying acceptance towards PMLN being the party that is going to be successful in the upcoming elections, with also criticism of being a Ladla or a King's party that many have been referring the PMLN to. So this is something that, of course, we've seen PMLN leadership deny, while at the same time it seems that both the legal course of action and the different stances of political parties, including those of Balochistan, in today's visit by the PMLN's leadership to the province, have emerged as pointing towards evidence for the same. We've also seen, of course, the PPP talking about similar rhetoric against the PMLN, and also perhaps taking a view at what is going on and still deciding and weighing its own options. So we're going to try and see what is really going on in terms of the new alliances and the impact that will have, particularly in Balochistan, and then, of course, in other provinces, including Sindh, traditionally stronghold of of the PPP, and what really is then going to be the way forward in terms of elections. Will the kind of favorites that we're seeing emerge actually going to succeed in the upcoming elections, and what is going to be the political impact of perhaps a similar strategy that we've seen in previous cycles of elections within the country as well. So that's going to be our focus in the second segment of the show. Today, of course, as always in the studios, I've been joined by Senior Analyst Faisal, and we've also been joined by Political Analyst Mr. Saif Jamshaid. Thank you very much for joining us and being part of the discussion. We've also been joined online by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Khan. Thank you, Dr. Jamil, for joining us and being part of the debate. And I'll start with you, Dr. Jamil, because we're focusing on our first segment in terms of what is going on with regards to the suffering of the people in the Gaza Strip, and of course the international community calling for an end to the genocide and calls for ceasefire. However, of course, more than a month has passed in the recent spate of attacks, and we still really haven't seen any progress towards de-escalation, with the rhetoric coming in from the Israeli leadership perhaps even more worrisome. So at this moment in time, in terms of the kind of momentum that perhaps on the public front we see developing towards free Palestine, do you really think that perhaps sooner we can actually see a move towards any sort of de-escalation on any front, or do you think that more situation is going to worsen?
Well, it is not really seen on the horizon at this point in time and for coming days until until Israel, what they have decided, they are able to, they are in a position to declare that they have achieved their goal. It doesn't seem, because what kind of a pressure the world is asserting on them? The public pressure, yes, that is really gaining its momentum all over the world. More importantly, the US, UK, France, Germany, and all most developed countries, the same developed countries whose governments are not really in favor of even saying that the war should be ceased, it should be, there should be a ceasefire, or even they are not condemning it. They are not condemning the kind of the historical, not seen in the history ever, about the atrocities which is really being committed by Israel. Um, Post seventh incident, whatever life is lost, even on the seventh, no one is going to condone that. As a matter of fact, the innocent lives I'm talking about. But see the proportion. More than 11,000 people, about 65 to 70% houses, the buildings have totally been demolished, really razed to the ground. About
Right,
more than hundred schools have been bombed.
right.
No regard to any international law, all the international
I'm
law,
glad
human.
I'm glad, Dr. Jamil, that you spoke about proportionality, and I understand that that was a conversation perhaps more relevant at the beginning of what is happening right now. But I think increasingly, it's not just a matter of something that is a disproportionate response. What is happening now perhaps is more significantly related to what has happened prior to October 7th, and the kind of momentum that we're seeing in people actually protesting is not in relation to what started off on October 7th and what may be a disproportionate retaliation. It's perhaps more than that in terms of the Free Palestine movement. Do you think that essentially what the Palestinians have been struggling for can actually have the kind of outcome through whatever is going on right now? And that sort of is being vocalized and not just sort of reduced to just the fact that this was a proportionate or disproportionate response.
Well, that is one of the descriptions of the war. And in the war, proportionate and disproportionate is also considered once it is sent to the International Court of Court of Criminal. But let me leave this point over here, and then once we
Right, right. Just
contextualize
another
it,
clarification,
probably we'll
Dr. Jamil.
understand
But
it more.
are we still referring to this as a war? Because many are not referring to this as a war. It's being called genocide, and that's what it seems
Well,
like.
let's go to the definition of a war crime.
Okay.
The Roman statutes very clearly define the war crime. In fact, Israelis not only are committing war crime at this point, after post 7th of December, 7th of October, November, but Israelis have been consistently committing a war crime. And how? I will refer to you here the Security Council resolution 2334 and Security Council resolution 242. 242, what does it say? That all the territory which is occupied by Israel during 67 war should be returned, and Israel should go back to the post war boundaries. They have not done it, and there have been consistently various resolutions about it. Israel didn't accept. On the top of it, Israel, what they are doing is that they have started pouring in more settlers in the occupied area, which attracts Geneva Convention 49. And the same thing, in fact, it attracts in Kashmir also. And once Geneva Convention 14, Article 49 is violated, it then attracts another additional protocol, and then it goes to the war crime Article 8 of the war crime.
Hmm.
So it is all documented, it is all tabulated, it is there in the international law. But the fact of the matter is that there is a mechanism to implement international law, and that mechanism has not been invoked. And what is that mechanism? Any international law, once it's violated, I was talking about the international about the war crime. Now, the war crime, there are three mechanisms, three are a crime against humanity. there are three mechanisms to really send the case to the International Court of Justice. One, that any member state with the evidence can send it. Two, that the Security Council can refer it. Three, that the group of organizations or a particular organization such as European Union, such as African Union or OIC, they can send it to the International War Crime, and the Prosecutor General of the International War Crime can take the suo motu action and start investigating the case. These are the four methods of doing that. I think these methods have not been invoked so far, despite the fact that the OIC, in its own article, Article 18, it very clearly dilates upon that there is a complete department within the OIC structure, and that department is headed by the Assistant Secretary General. And Assistant Secretary General, it's his job, the job of Assistant Secretary General to assist OIC that all the Security Council resolutions, he should be able to pursue that, follow that, and suggest to the OIC at all level
Right,
about
I absolutely
implementation
understand
of.
that, but Dr. Jamil, the job perhaps of organizations such as the OSCE or the UN or others has been such fundamental aspects, including conflict resolution, that it almost seems abstract that that's actually going to happen, because despite this being their job, it's not happening. And despite the methods that you've actually outlined, they're so politically tainted in terms of them actually materializing into something substantial for its people that it almost seems impossible for that to actually happen. Like you said, that it has to be invoked, it has to go through the UN Security Council, but really who's sitting and who has the powers on that table is of course question mark, and we'll explore that also. But I also fundamentally want to come back to the premise that you're basing this on, that this is a war crime, and that may be so in one definition that you're referring to. But Faisal, I want to further elaborate this, because the conversation or the narrative that is being spoken about, especially in terms of its reporting, in terms of international media, sort of also gravitates toward the same in terms of this being portrayed as a war, when at this point in time the international community has largely agreed that this is not a war, this is genocide and ethnic cleansing. But this is something that is again being removed from the general conversation, which perhaps is why certain actions that need to be there as consequence of genocide and ethnic cleansing are not happening.
Sana, you're very right about it, and of course it is a war crime. And when we talk about the mass movements which were obviously being ordered by the brute force used by Israel, we kept on seeing that the north of Gaza is being ordered by their authorities to be vacated by the Gazans and move towards the southern side of Gaza. And while they were moving, of course, we saw that people who were migrating, I mean, on the immigrants, internal immigrants of Gaza, there were indiscriminate bombings taking place, and of course so many of them, they died while actually trying to search for a safer place for them. When we talk about war crimes, attacking any school is a war crime. In any case, attacking any hospital during a war is a war crime. No matter you have your own kind of concocted stories in which you believe that underneath different hospitals there are headquarters of Hamas, and there is a very different underworld which is going on. Even if that is there, first of all, it is not Israelis or Gazans who are going to look for it. If somebody has an authority to decide on it, then that is international observers. We are not seeing that because obviously Israelis, they do not allow international observers. The only observers we have right now sitting in Gaza, they are the journalists who are associated with the prominent news agencies, prominent news channels of the world. But what is taking place? More than 10 of them journalists, the prominent ones, they have died in this conflict. Many more. They have been injured. They have died while doing their own duty to the humanity.
Right,
I must say.
But essentially, Faisal, my argument still remains in terms of you also referring this to as war crime, and I understand the perception on where you're coming from. But I still want to reiterate whether or not this is essentially a war crime, because then that means that we're agreeing with the premise that this is a war.
One example I would give. Last night there was a press conference by a group of doctors. They actually highlighted it, and they demanded Geneva Convention to fulfill their promises, and that promise is that all of the doctors who are serving humanity in the war zones, they need to be protected, and they demanded Geneva Conventions to protect these doctors, which means, of course, these are war crimes, and they are demanding a protection by the international law, by the Geneva Convention, and by the obviously, you know, the leaders of the world, the Western world mainly, who are actually controlling United Nations, who are controlling the Western world, who are controlling the narratives, but they are, you know, hand in glove with Israel right now. That is why, I mean, it is taking place.
But that's something that's always been happening. And Mr. Saif, I'll take your opinion on this as well in terms of what has happened in the past, even previously, not just from October 7th, but previously as well. It seems that unfortunately it took the loss of so many lives and the fact that children and women are being attacked so blatantly that perhaps the world is beginning to just now understand what really is going on. And still, it is hard to explain to people whether or not the situation on ground is that of a war or a genocide or ethnic cleansing. And of course, the way that things are reported doesn't help. But do you think that with the way that we have seen more and more people actually come out and join voices against what is going on and call for the end of ceasefire, they essentially understand what really is happening and how perhaps the power dynamic is so imbalanced that this is not something that we can ever refer to as a war?
Firstly, Sana, thank you for having me here. I'd absolutely like to second you. The very idea over here is that this is not a war that is happening. This is an ethnic cleansing that is happening in an area that is 41 kilometers wide, and it is maybe 12 kilometers from one side and 6 kilometers from another. And it is one of the world's most heavily and densely populated and clustered areas to begin with. Now, you don't really fight a war with babies. That is something we need to be very clear of. And in these 11,000 casualties, more than 7,000 in number and in score have been children under the age of 10. So the very first thing that the international community needs to understand, that this is an apartheid state that is committing state-sponsored terrorism against a territory that it wants to violate. That's the first thing that we need to begin with. And the second thing that we need to understand in the dynamics of whatever is happening, that maybe the global community or the global political optics from the West are not really trying to accept that it is an ethnic cleansing or a mass level genocide, maybe a reincarnation of what really happened to the European Jews who then came later on and captured 90% of what belonged to Palestinians. Maybe this is the reincarnation of what happened during the Second World War.
Yeah.
And at third, I'd be very audible and I'd be very vocal about it. What happened in London 3 days ago, it is not something that the international world, the international community, or the international media is blind of. 700,000 people in a cosmopolitan city like London raising one voice that stopped this violence against women and children. Maybe what the intention of Israel is right now to eliminate Gaza, I think this is the rebirth of Gaza. This is the rebirth of the Palestinian dream that the Palestinian Authority had dreamt of in 1948, and despite multiple violations of the United Nations resolution, I think today it is time for the international community to reflect upon the fact that if 101 UN officials, I repeat, 101 UN officials are killed within 1 month, then I think the UN seriously needs to do something about this terrorist state, so-called Israel.
Absolutely. Dr. Jamil, this is important in terms of what has happened in London and the way that we have seen so many people actually come out and speak about something that, of course, needs our attention. However, at the same time, we also see that this still perhaps is not enough in terms of creating a ripple. So far, with the world leaders, or even in the countries that this is actually happening. Do you think that there is going to be that sort of effect eventually if more and more voices actually join and make a difference in terms of the actual decision makers taking a different stance that they're doing right now? Or do you think that the way that political situations arise, the way that different variables affect relationships between countries around the world, is going to be oblivious to the fact and can largely still ignore so many people raising voices for Palestine?
Well, the world had ignored, particularly the rulers of the world at that time. Once Iraq was being invaded, we witnessed at that time more than 1 million people on the same roads. But those people, rulers of that time, or the cabinet of that time, did not really heed to it. Um, uh, Today it's happening. Obviously, the public pressure definitely matters a lot. Even in United States, people have started talking that the forthcoming election would have its would definitely have a negative impact so far as this Democrat government is concerned. So it would have definitely in various part of the world its own ripple effect. But right now, we are talking about 37th or 38th day of this genocide which is going on. You may call it war or you may not call it war. That's a different thing. But what Israeli are saying and what the allies of Israel are saying that yes, it's a war, right? We don't agree with it. That's a different thing. Genocide, yes, it is genocide. It comes into under that definition. Whether it's a war crime or not, whether it's a crime against humanity or not, it's just both. From all the definitions which I just quoted in the earlier segment.
Okay.
101 UN staff, never in the history it happened ever in so many conflict zones. I've been a international civil servant. I've served for United Nations for more than 9 years in different countries, and I know they have the protection of Geneva Convention, but even that was not regarded by Israel. And there is a penal clauses for it if someone is not really following the international laws and the protection given by the Geneva Convention. But again, as you said, the implementing mechanism is only one, and that is chapter 6 and chapter 7 of the Charter of United Nations, which means that the Security Council and Security Council binding resolutions. Previously, also there was binding resolution, but it's the implementing component is in chapter 6 and chapter 7. Chapter 6 is basically without using force, the countries are brought under sanction, and the chapter 7 is the United Nations. They start using force by sending the peacekeeping forces there, and they implement their order as they have done it in East Timor and as they have done it in Kosovo and some other parts of the world. So here, why they are not doing it? Yes, Security Council is a political component because there are 5 permanent members. Unless they are on one page, the resolution cannot be passed. It would be vetoed. So 2 members perhaps would be very happy to bring a resolution for the end of war, for ceasing the war, and lifting the siege of Gaza by Israel, and bringing Israel accountable. In fact, our country, our theoretical prime minister, he very vehemently demanded that the Israel should be made accountable, and he was the first head of the government who mentioned our theoretical prime minister that Israel should be held accountable, and he was the one who said that it's shameful for Israel to conduct this kind of an
Hmm.
operation against a group of small people, and in that process, the innocent people are losing their life. There are 3 components again. One is we have agreed, and the entire world, though they agree, but they are not willing. The powerful countries are not willing to implement the binding clauses on Israel, and there is a reason to it. Israel, over
Yeah.
a period of time, since they had first held a meeting of Zionism in Switzerland back in 1897, once they decided that they will have a great Israel. Again, it's a debatable concept, but the way it is emerging, we can discuss. And also, they decided that there would be a state for the Jews, and that would be named as Israel. So they did that in 1948, and believe me, in 1948, the Jews population in that area was less than 28%. And today they have occupied it. It's more than 55, close to 60% in that land, which was Palestinian land. They were pushed from there. They were made refugees and pushed to Gaza. And in the camps, they have been bombarded, and there are more than 30,000 tons of the ammunition used, right, from the sea, from the air, and from the ground. At the moment, they have lined up about 250 tanks in front of this small strip of Gaza, and some of the tanks are there. The Lebanese border also, with the full might of United States warships there in the Mediterranean Sea. So, if we bear all these factors, something crosses our mind, and that is why Israel is being supported by most powerful countries except China and Russia directly. So there has to be some reason. And the reason is that last about more than 100 years, Israel, through its network of Zionism, they have been able to bring their influence in most of these governments, more importantly, United States, where the bureaucracy is completely, they are being influenced. The Congress and the House of Commons being influenced, media under total control, financial institutions under total control. So these are the major factors that these big countries are going against the wishes, against the will, and against the momentum of the people who are raising their voice of human right and the
Right,
value to the
absolutely.
human
And
dignity,
this
the
network
value
that
to
you have
the.
pointed towards, Dr. Jamil, is important. I'll discuss this further. But I want to also build a little bit on your experience as a diplomat and what you referred to earlier in terms of stances by different political leaders, including that of Pakistan. And of course, while we appreciate what is being said, I want to understand whether or not the kind of statements that we perhaps see are guarded in terms of what we say, reflect a sort of filter with regards to our own interests or the political landscape or our affiliations with certain countries or the others, and understand that may be important in the way that the international dynamics work. But I want to then also understand that given issues such as these, given when we talk about humanitarian crises such as a genocide or ethnic cleansing, how much can we really be careful about how we say or what we really refer to, and whether or not we're going to offend someone or not? Because at the same time, while we talk about how these humanitarian issues need to be voiced and need our attention, we also need perhaps similar action from our decision makers and leaders. And that's something that's important when we talk about countries such as the US and UK. And if we can demand this from their leaders, for them to step up and say the right thing, how much of the right thing then are we saying and deciding on, and what really is influencing the way that we're actually taking the stance in the situation?
No, we have taken the principal instance. We have taken the same instance which Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah had taken it in his foreign policy. So it's again we draw our strength from there. But in the present day world, obviously we are in the world, in the community of world, and we have to regard some of the diplomatic undercurrents and the geopolitical situation. But despite that, there are certain stand on the principles, and Pakistan has taken principal stand on it. Although we could not go beyond that because of variety of reasons, as you also mentioned, and plus our own economic situation. So Prime Minister Kakar, I think he is the person who has represented Pakistan at the at all the level. 16th session of the ECO, he was very vocal in that, and there he said that the campaign, what is the campaign against Gazan Palestinians. It's full of terror and brutality, which Israel is really committing. And he demanded immediate seizure of the war. But what happened was that once it went to the bigger platform, that is the OIC, there they were very guarded in their language, and they used by far the same language which they had used it in 2019 when
Okay.
the Tel Aviv, when Israel was shifting its capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. At that time also there was an extraordinary session of the head of states and head of the government under Article 9 of the OIC Charter. So at that time, if we compare the two joint communique, you'll find so many things similar. And one of those similar things, if you compare, they have quoted at that time the Security Council resolution. This time also they have quoted Security Council resolution. And at that time they had talked about they had spoken about the two-state solution, and this time also they have spoken about two-state solution. So, and then of course this time they have condemned. They have gone short of referring the matter to the International Criminal Court, which in my view they should have done that. They have gone short of boycotting the product of the Israel, which they could have done it as a multilateral forum. And OIC is obviously it's a very heavy forum because it has been formed under the United Nations Charter, Chapter 8, as a regional organization, like the other regional organization, European Union or AU or some other regional organization. So they had their own way. They could have adopted the way which is enshrined, the articles which is there in the OIC Charter. And the very first article of OIC Charter in Article 1, they really do the advocacy for the cause of the Palestinians. And
right, absolutely,
but
and
this
that's
time
important. But of course, we're going to try and understand what really is that is needed for this to actually work and be more tangible than it is at the moment. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil, for joining us and being part of the discussion. Mrs. Saif, when we look at what is happening in terms of what we see as the network to what Dr. Jamil was also referring to, and how perhaps the problem isn't just with what is happening right now or an end to the current situation, but also in terms of a dismantling of the Israeli network, then it seems that bodies such as the OSCE or the UN perhaps are not strong enough or not equipped enough, or there's perhaps not enough will to actually have an action plan forward which is more united and proper in terms of what needs to happen. Can then this be brought down to the public opinion or public voices or public boycotts, as we've seen a lot of products being also boycotted in Pakistan, elsewhere in the world as well, having an impact on the kind of financial perhaps channels, albeit small at the moment in terms of what is going on? Will this then be perhaps the only sort of push that can actually sway the variables and factors on which different decisions are made?
Sana, I think that for the very first time after 74 years, it is public opinion that is tickling up to revive and maybe awaken that lost political conscience. Historically, we've always seen political leaders and the top-notch corridors of power trying to tickle public opinion, but for the very first time, it is the response of the global public that has at least made the world understand that what this so-called state is doing, what it did at the Nakba in 1948, what really happened in the 67 Six-Day War, what happened, what Israel really did with the Oslo Accords, what they did with the Camp David, and ultimately what they're doing right now. I think it's the reawakening of the public conscious, maybe that was once very much selectively rising from the eastern side of the world, but now it is something admirable to see that whether you talk about Latin American countries, whether you talk about European countries, whether you talk about the Middle East, you talk about the Far East, today the most trending hashtags on Twitter are freedom for Palestine and justice for the children of Gaza. It's not really about a war anymore. It's about a genocide. It's about crimes being committed against innocent women and children. And you're standing on a population of 2.2 million people who are just demanding one simplistic right: the right to breathe freely, the right to walk freely, the right to talk freely. and maybe 7.94 billion people of the world need to rise up for once after these 74 years for these 2.2 million people. I think that's not really a hard thing to do.
Right, absolutely. Faisal, when we look at the current situation and with the way that we see a lot of people speaking up at the moment and understand how fundamentally significant the situation is right now and how different it is in terms of the kind of losses that we are seeing. But previously we've also seen that there in a lot of conflicts, and particularly also with regards to Palestine, there comes a time in the aftermath of one attack or the other that there's a lot of people who are actually talking about and raising concerns, and there's this flow of information that's coming and a lot of people actually raising their voices, and sort of eventually sort of dies down. Maybe there's some sort of lukewarm effort that's done to sort of shut the current conversation, and it's sort of just come to a point where nobody really is feeling that drive to actually come out and really call for an end to ceasefire or a free Palestine movement. Do you think that potentially this situation can perhaps also evolve into something that unfortunately we might forget about or sort of adjust to or be sort of normalized with as to what has been happening previously also?
I mean, the kind of Sana, the kind of control over the media you see from the powerful quarters. I'm talking about Israel and people who are desired by Israel in the Western world as well. You know, we always talk about how Zionism actually persisted. We forget about Illuminatis and we forget about Freemasons. These two are well aligned with the Zionism, and Zionism, Theodor Herzl, he actually introduced it on the basis of utmost racism, and he was someone who was considered as having all of the plans about greater Israel, and of course he hailed from Vienna, and whatever he did in the later ages, we know how he played his game. So now, of course, Illuminatis and Freemasons, along with the Zionists, living and controlling the powerful positions in the Western world, of course they will make sure that somehow it dries down and the people are obviously dragged away from this notion that of course Palestinians, they should be given a right to a state, right to life, and of course right to human rights, all of the human rights which are obviously given to every human being by the Geneva Convention, I must say. But here the problem is, I mean, we won't be seeing that happening unless the West changes its course. We saw in Britain, yesterday, a little course was adjusted, and that was related to Suella Braverman. She was sacked from her position, and she was the one who was actually calling out names, very odd names, to the protesters who were protesting in favor of Palestine against the brute force which was being used by Israel in Gaza, and she was sacked. And I think this is how it should be. The West needs to prove that it stands with humanity, not with the brute force which is being used against the humanity. And here, Sana, very important point, and that is when the ships, they docked at Palestine in post Second World War, the ships were carrying flags on which it was written that we've been expelled by someone. Please give us a right to live, and don't disappoint us. And the people of Palestine at that time did not disappoint the humanity. But here it is, the people, they were helping out at that time. I mean, it's like Israel is same like that dog that actually eventually bites the same hand that actually feeds it. So this is what is happening, and this must end now. And I always say, the Jews, Christians and Muslims, they coexisted in Palestine for centuries, and nothing happened. The problem only started when the Western world dumped its garbage from West into Palestine, and that's when the problem was ignited. And it is not the Jews that are problem for the world. It is the Zionist, racist ideology that is the problem, and this must be dealt with.
Absolutely. It's not about religion anyway, and we really hope that we are able to actually move forward towards something that eases the suffering that so many people are currently going through and so many lives that are currently being lost as we speak. And this is something that needed our attention many years ago as well. But we're glad that people are understanding what's going on and that they're raising their voices, and we hope that this continues to happen and that we're able to see the political leaders around the world also make the right choices. We're going to end this segment here and talk a little bit about what is happening regarding the political situation at home in Pakistan, where we see the PMLN forming alliances with different political parties. And of course, since we have seen the return of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, it seems that this has been one of the key areas that he has been working upon, especially with regards to the upcoming elections, a date for which we've also finally seen. It's important, of course, also to talk about the kind of perception that exists with the PMLN being the party. And Faisal, just yesterday we were talking about how there seems to be a general sort of acceptance as to what is going to happen or who's going to come to the forefront, even though, of course, we're so far away from the actual vote. But it seems with the way that we've seen various actions take place, with different political parties also making the decisions, that is where the wind seems to be swaying. I want to understand, given today's visit to Balochistan and how we have seen quite a few electables join the PMLN from various parties, including the BNP, BAP, and even the PPP. It's important then to understand really what do you think will be the impact first on the political dynamic of Balochistan, and then we'll talk about the rest of the country.
Yes, Anna, this is quite fascinating for me. Obviously, when I see People's Party, it has reservations when it comes to Sindh. But when it comes to Balochistan, of course, they don't have any reservations out there, because both of the parties, I mean, People's Party and PMLN, they consider that they don't have the vote bank in Balochistan, so they have to have the local hands.
But they must have reservations as to what happened today, no?
Yeah, I mean, they had reservations, but overall, if we look at the ground realities, I mean, even if we talk about People's Party have already, always required some kind of ground help from the local parties like BNP and BAP right now, and Mengal Group and all of these groups. They are the ones who actually control the vote bank over there. So they are the.
But the same ground help is being asked for or sort of obtained now by the PMLN.
By the PMLN. But Sana, I just want to.
Why is it? Do you think that these parties have navigated towards the PMLN again because of how the wind is blowing?
Because they can sense, as PMLN itself is creating a sort of narrative about them, that they are the ones who are going to be on the driving seat.
Are they creating it because the PMLN leaders actually rejected this, saying that they're not actually the favorites, and the situation has never really helped them? They've just
this is quite confusing, because they keep on negating this factor, but at the same time, few of their tier 2, tier 3 leaders, they boast in their sermons, which are being delivered to the people on the ground. They are telling them that we are the ones who are coming back, so that they can grab on the vote.
Isn't that Jalsa talk?
It is the Jalsa talk.
Don't all parties do that pre-elections?
Jalsa talk obviously represents the internal policy of the party itself. This narrative, I just want to highlight here, that this election, the coming up election, like I said yesterday, it is going to be the most important election of Pakistan's history, and it is going to be free and fair. And when we talk about the free and fair, then I think claiming this or trying to create a narrative in which they are portraying as if they are going to get the premier seat, rather than doing that, they need to work.
But surely, Faisal, the kind of self-assurance that anybody contesting for election saying, "Hey, I'm the guy you should vote for," is not something you can really blame them for, is it?
But Sana, it is so odd to see Prime Minister, 3-time Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, after 40 years of his politics, still he requires some helping hands within the country. If his policies were so strong, if his narratives were so strong, if his manifestos were so strong, then why not his party all alone contests election throughout Pakistan and then wins it? Why not?
Because no one's asking for it, and that's important in terms of what we are seeing. And Mr. Saif, I would like your opinion as well, because we keep talking about how the manifesto or the mandate or the narrative is important and the real problems of the country need to be addressed, but where is the need for that? Who's really asking these parties or these leaders for that plan? Why shouldn't they actually move towards these political dynamics and seat adjustments and gaining electables, if that is the way that they're actually contesting the elections and gaining their ground and what has been done in the past? Then where is the onus in terms of them actually giving us these mandates, because who's asking for it?
Sana, there's an old saying, when at Rome, do at Rome as the Romans do. So since the past, I think 70 plus years, Pakistani politics has been when in Pakistan, do at Pakistan as the Pakistanis do. I think it's very unfortunate to see that still we are lingering with that regionalization of politics. And in fact, I'd just given a recent statement that came from the co-party chairman of the People's Party, Bilawal Saab. He just said that Mr. Nawaz Sharif should be refocusing on Lahore. And in fact, coming in from a national leader who was maybe the foreign minister in the PDM-led government in coalition, trying to reiterate that reflaring of regionalism in politics is something that needs to be rejected right now. This is the first thing. And the second thing is that all of the parties maybe are simply trying to capture the swing voter right now. They are not trying to capture the voter in the national spectrum, the politically cautious voter. They are simply trying to maneuver the emotionally sponsored voters, because after maybe most of the top tier leadership of Tehreek-e-Insaf in hot waters these days, there's a lot of swing voter as well. So maybe these politicians are trying to play this smart game over here, and that's simply capturing the swing voters, and alongside the swing voters, capturing electables. PMLN's take on Balochistan is simply capturing electables, and meeting with two former chief ministers who have had working relationships with PMLN is simply a recall that maybe the political democracy of Pakistan, or the future of the political democracy of this country, lies in the position of electables as to which party they align with. So I think rather than calling out shots for electables, rather than capturing swing voters, it's time for national manifestos to be discussed on national television. And maybe we need to get inspired from Western European democracies, or maybe the American democracy as well, that when the presidential debates happen, people actually listen to what will be the public policy, the economic policy, the social policy, the cultural policy, like in the next 5 years. So the politically conscious... Do
you think the media should do that?
And I think Saif really wants to see some fights going on.
I definitely want to see some fights going on with Faisal Saab on one side and myself on the other side. But I genuinely believe that the media should take initiative. And this should be the first time, in fact, that we should set
but will they have the power to do that?
I think if you know 2.2 million people, as we were talking about Gaza earlier, can wake up the conscience of more than 7 billion people in the world. I think a few media houses in Pakistan can wake up the political conscious of maybe more than 250 million people. I think with a little optimism, maybe not this election, but with the ripple effect in the next election, we can.
Well, there's something to hope for. Thank you very much, Mr. Saif and Faisal, of course, for joining us and being part of the debate. That's all we have time for. We'll now see you tomorrow.